Meet Ben Meyers, CEO of LongeviQuest, the global authority on maximum human longevity. Through their work, LongeviQuest is uncovering the stories and lives of the world's oldest people, providing a platform that celebrates both their wisdom and their remarkable strength. LongeviQuest is home to the LongeviQuest Directory, the premier database on the lives and achievements of supercentenarians from all over the world. This groundbreaking directory connects people to the inspiring stories of those who've reached incredible ages, sharing insights into what it takes to live a long, meaningful life. Under Ben's leadership, LongeviQuest has brought together expert age validators from around the globe who previously worked separately, creating a united community dedicated to the highest standards of accuracy and integrity. The LongeviQuest Global Validation Commission not only maintains these standards, but accredits researchers, ensuring every story in their database is meticulously validated. Ben and the LongeviQuest team are on a mission not just to document ages, but to connect people to the fascinating lives behind the numbers. By preserving and sharing these stories, they're inspiring new generations to appreciate the journey of longevity and the wisdom of those who've lived it. Join us in HealthGevity podcast with Dr. Dana Marduk as we explore the lives of the world's oldest people and the reasons behind a long, healthy life with LongeviQuest, where longevity meets legacy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of HealthGevity podcast. Today, we have a guest that probably not many of you know, but they are doing something amazing that today we want to talk about a lot of different aspects of what they are doing. So today we have Ben Meyers, founder and CEO at LongeviQuest. Actually, there are a lot of other words, nowadays like ourselves, HealthGevity, longevity, and this is a word that's for just the past few years, a lot of people are creating new words with it. So LongeviQuest, right? So welcome, Ben, and tell us more, please, about what you are doing, maybe a little bit of your background, and then we'll have more questions for you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Marduk. I appreciate it. And you're right. There are a lot of words that are floating around in this field of longevity. What I'm doing, so just a little about my background, how I got into this. I am not a scientist. My interest comes from really history and then also being close with my own grandparents, knowing a lot of my own great-grandparents. And when I was younger, I'm here in South Florida, where there's a lot of kind of a high elderly population, and just found it really fascinating that around the corner from us, there are veterans of D-Day or survivors of the Holocaust, or people who are firsthand accounts, not just of a lot of adversity, but also overcoming it and living great lives. And so I was interested in it then, and then around 2007 was looking up the last living World War I veterans, and most of whom were over 110. And so naturally that led to who are the oldest people in the world. And then for about 15 years after that, the information about that topic was quite sporadic, more anecdotal. There was not really a global list or somebody reliable to tie it all together. What does this mean? And really just 2 years ago, or about 3 years ago, got started on LongeviQuest, or LQ, since LongeviQuest can be a mouthful, where we have experts in a lot of different areas where it's different. In Japan, the records are different, in Europe and Latin America. And so pulling together that global research community and trying to support some of them to allow us to validate more supercentenarians. And there's a lot of interest in what is this group doing? What is this population doing? The trends that they're allowing a long lifespan. For me, the most interesting aspect is really them as individuals and as people, because there's really a lot of interesting things to learn, not just about historical events, but how to live a good life. So I really like the individual aspect of it personally, and that's kind of what we're up to.
Yeah, amazing. Well, actually, nowadays, when we talk about centenarian, most of people think of, let's say, the blue zones, right? The five areas in the world that most of people live over 100. And there are a lot of recently, actually, documentaries even about what they are doing. And it's interesting that most of it's about lifestyle, right? It's not about technological intervention. It's mostly about how they live. And this is very interesting. And we are so interested in that. Why? Because we think at the moment, maybe, I don't know, maybe 90, 95 90% of people do not have access to the latest technologies that some people like Brian Johnson have, right? So that's why we need to focus on the part that we have a little bit control over it. So tell me a little bit maybe about this. Let's start with this actually, that based on the experience and the data that you have, probably if we want to mention 3 to 4 main reasons that people can live healthy. Longevity is not about just living longer, right? It's about living better, healthier. And so maybe from your personal experience, I don't know, maybe the connection that you had personally with them or the data that you have, what are 3 or 4 most important, I can say, pillars of longevity that can help us actually to postpone some diseases, age-related diseases, and we can live longer and healthier?
So I'll give some stats from the data, and I'll tell you a very consistent one that we've noticed is that when you have people who are 114, they often more easily remember things from when they were 14 instead of when they were 100. Their long-term memory stays intact, and so we ask them, and we always, when we're interviewing supercentenarians, we kind of let them direct the conversation if there's something that triggers memory. So we hear a lot about childhood. The stats have been updated since, but it's in excess of 80%, even with the update, of supercentenarians grew up in a household with 2 parents. And of course, this is at a time in the past where life expectancy was very low. There were wars, their parents were fighting wars. And so there seems to be a really strong start to fortitude. A lot of the studies that we've done have involved comparing supercentenarians within the cohort. And so we've noticed things that there are, for female supercentenarians, tend to be a lot fewer children than with male supercentenarians. What does that say? It's tough to see. I'll tell you that as far as what things like diet, you mentioned that 95% of people probably don't have access to the technology that's being used by some. Well, in the past, that was 100%. And there was no, even the concept of dieting itself, which is now very firmly established. When a supercentenarian, I think what folks should consider is that they were 100, they're 115 today, let's say. They grew up in an era where, forget dieting, food security was not always guaranteed. So there was a lot of eating what they had to. And we also have to remember one constant factor, I would say, as well. I don't know if I gave you 1 or 2 so far, but also there was not a lot of great attention to historical events. And I know I mentioned earlier that was a reason why I was interested in this subject. But if you ask, I'll give an example of Elizabeth Francis, who somebody who is an English-speaking supercentenarian. So we had very in-depth conversations. And I asked her about certain historical events, including, she's a Black woman, and when President Obama was elected, I thought perhaps that might have some, personal significance, and she just brushed it off. I said, well, how did you feel when he won? I knew he was going to win. I asked about things like the Kennedy assassination, World War II, and she said consistently, like, I wasn't really paying that close of attention. And that's something that we do hear consistently. And I'll also mention that a lot of supercentenarians are in Japan. And of course, when they're going, there was a lot of difficult periods that they went through. And so having this kind of, let's focus internally on our life, our family, an internal focus on the factors they can control and not, I feel like there's a lot of doom scrolling today. And so that's probably the biggest lifestyle factor. The other one that's highly significant is religion. And that's just something, perhaps because of the time frame that these folks came of age in, a huge majority of those who report, we never hear that they were atheists. They never say that, but we hear consistently from those who do speak on it that they are or were people of faith. So those factors have stood out among the ones that we've tracked.
Very interesting. Well, actually, they are kind of, let's say, live history. You can ask about like almost 100 a century ago, and this should be very interesting. But what is actually more interesting for me is that we have actually, we have something we call hormesis. It's the system of the body, which means that whatever does not kill me makes me stronger. So as you said, these people have seen a lot of things, World War I, II, and a lot of problems. So that somehow made them stronger. And if they had the technology and all of these facilities that we have today, definitely, probably they could actually live and pass 130 or something like that. But let's talk about one of the most famous, and by now, I think the oldest person that we have recorded is Jeanne Calment, right? 122 years and 165 days, if I'm not wrong. So even though, there are a lot of stories around her, but I would like to hear from you. I mean, probably you have done some research about her, that, okay, she used to smoke a lot, she used to eat a lot of chocolate, and actually it was a very normal lifestyle without even thinking about, that much that we today think about caloric restriction, supplements, exercise, sleep, all of this stuff. So tell us a little bit more. I'm interested to know something maybe that we don't hear or see it in the story of other people around her.
Well, she's a great example. So she is such an anomaly in many ways. And one thing that's notable is that I'm amazed at your precision there. But you being 122 years and then several months, there's nobody else who's even crossed the age of 120.
Yeah.
So she's obviously a huge, in terms of just the math and the numbers, a huge aberration from the norm. But then the factors you mentioned as well, smoked until a very late age, and simultaneously also rode a bike until a very late age. So that says something about lung capacity. One thing that there's probably an overabundance of reporting on this aspect of it, where when somebody says, oh, they might have a glass of wine every day, or they really like a certain type of scotch, there tends to be this association in the, a lot of headlines might say, well, scotch is the reason, scotch is the credit. That's a bit exaggerated by a lot of the media. But one thing that is not common is just the total denial of treats and of things that make people happy. And so whether that's chocolate, smoking, we don't see too many cigarette smokers. Cigars are more common, but what we really don't see are folks who totally renounce all things that they enjoy, whether it's a sweet, whether it's alcohol, or whether it's things like television. There's just guilty pleasures for watching a show on end. People like parliamentary debates who sit there and watch it. There are things that people look forward to on a daily basis that's very important. And one thing that we'll always hear is that there is this ritualistic element to, they look forward to their morning newspaper. It gets them out of bed. And it's not so common nowadays. There's the kind of, we work for a 2-week vacation and everything goes into maximizing a smaller part of the year. They just really look at having a vacation every day. As far as Jeanne Calment is concerned, a lot of her behavior has attracted scrutiny because it's almost as if she was flaunting it. Hey, I'm the oldest person of all time by many years. So I understand personally why there are people who have questioned the age, because it just seems so unusual, so not what you would expect. However, she left a loud trail, so to say, throughout her life. There's a lot of people who knew her throughout her life, a lot of records, and she's really probably somebody who's going to fascinate people for a long time until one day 122 is a common year to live to.
Right, exactly. And let me tell you a little bit background about the HealthGevity Nation. Actually, it started from 2012. The first seminar that I had, it was how to live 100 healthy years. And by then, the name was something else, even though we had a lot of changes. But recently, we have, let's say, changed it to HealthGevity Nation. The name was 123 Years Young Club. I tried from many years ago when people asked me that, okay, how old are you? I said, okay, you mean how young I am? Because even saying that old for a person is like 10, 15, it's just a little crazy. So I searched exactly about centenarian, and I found that, as you said, we only have one person, let's say 122. And I thought that, okay, why? What is the reason? What should be the reason? What could be the reason that we have this limitation? For example, in biology, we have Hayflick limits for the number of the cell division, but why we haven't passed 123? Is there any reason from our telomeres, from the whole biology of a system of our biology? It's about the genes, it's about the environment, lifestyle. I want to ask you this question, that from your experience or the data or the stories that you have heard about other people, or maybe, I don't know, I'm looking for this reason. And of course, I know there are a lot of reasons, but from your perspective, why do you think we haven't passed this 123? And how much you see it, let's say, plausible that in the next maybe few years, we would have somebody that can pass?
I think it's quite plausible. I believe that the reason has to do mostly with Madame Calment being a really unique case and being a really unique individual who it just really stands out. However, when we look at below so-called first place all time, right now she's the all-time human longevity record holder. But below that, people have been living longer when we look at supercentenarians. A very sad example because of the day that we're having this conversation, sadly, is Maria Branius Morera, who has been the oldest living person for now over a year and a half. Passed away, unfortunately, at the age, well after turning 117. Very lucid till the end, but very upbeat or accepting of it, in fact. Took over for that title from Lucille Rondon. And we're talking about a sequence of people who, she was 118. Kane Tanaka before that was 119. And now the new world oldest person in the wake of Senor Brani's passing is Tomiko Ituka, who's 116. When I first got involved in the supercentenarian field, just as a pure kind of a fan in a way, maybe about 17 years ago, the oldest person was barely 114, and that was common. And there were some who went below that. And when we look at, I personally, as I mentioned, I prefer the biographies and meeting these people and looking at them as individuals. But there are, when we look at stats and plotting the age of the world's oldest person, it is an upward trajectory overall. Calment is an aberration, but we look at LongeviQuest, and that's one reason we were involved in it, because maybe about 2 years ago, actually it's August right now, so 2 years ago, before we started publishing on a site our findings, there were 9 known supercentenarians by the prior organization. The Gerontology Research Group just really was unable, as a volunteer organization, to kind of pump that research out. And so with 9, that might lead people to think it's a lot less common. But now, by going not just to the United States and Western Europe, really expanding in Japan, which was actually underrepresented, believe it or not, going to Latin America, we're finding it's a lot more common to become a supercentenarian and a lot more common to reach 115, 16, 17. So it's like an American basketball term where somebody's not making a lot of shots, but they're hanging around the rim, and they're in the position to be scoring baskets. And in this case, I do think of these people in some senses athletes of some kind, as Olympians. Very impressive physical achievements, what they've done in addition to their lives. But you have a lot of people who are reaching the 8th oldest of all time, 7th oldest, 6th, and eventually somebody's going to pierce Calment's record.
Fantastic. So, we almost hear every day from all around the world that they say, okay, I have a grandma that she is now getting 120, 30, 40. They're talking about the numbers crazy. And if you just see the YouTube, you see hundreds of videos showing some old people that they say they are 140, 50 or something even more. So I want to know a little bit, talk about the details of your criteria, how you actually somehow, let's say, gather the data and information, what are the stages, because I travel a lot, and I face a lot of people like this, that they say, okay, my grandma is like 120 or 30, can we enter them into this websites or Guinness record or something like that? So I want to know, is personally I'm interested, and probably we can even work on that when we are traveling and talking to people. So please explain more about that.
The key is, and there are standards that we have, and it's actually published. We have a methodology section on our site, and it has the charter, and there's a description of the process. But I'm happy to explain it here. The key principle is consistency throughout somebody's life of the age they were reporting, and the main way to verify that is to have at least one early life document, at least one midlife document, and at least one late life. So early life could be, for example, a birth certificate or a baptism record, or koseki, a Japanese household system, whatever it may be. Middle life could be a marriage record, for a deed, purchasing a home, something like a driver's license if cars were around back then, or military draft record. And late life is something more recent. One issue that is really, I would say that I would consider it our greatest challenge, frankly, is that there are large portions of the world that, through no fault of their own whatsoever, have a lack of early life records. I will point out 2 areas in particular, and that's Africa, pretty much all of Africa, and then as well a lot of China, where there's just a lack of records, except in very specific instances. Now, the way we try to go about this in other countries, well, let me just say first that when somebody comes in those countries, they might be able to have a government issued certificate, and it might say they're 130 years old. We're in no position to doubt that. We're not going to go around and say, hey, your age is fake. That's not what it's about. But unfortunately, there just didn't exist. And this is a sad result in some cases of an attitude of some colonial powers, well, some people's lives here are not worth keeping in detail. That it was a big problem, unfortunately. So we can't really go back and verify. And unfortunately, we haven't found a way around that. What we do try to do, we do believe in the principle, of 0 to 1, which is basically if we can get our first, person in the country, we can then learn new things to help validate more. We do find it relevant because I don't think it's very motivating to say, well, there's no super centenarians in Africa. That's not true. There are. As sure as we're sitting here having this conversation, there are super
Right.
centenarians in Africa, and we want to know who they are. In India, they have a similar problem in many ways, but Goa, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, it was part of the Portuguese Empire, but their records are uniquely good going back to those days. And so
Right.
India never had a validated supercentenarian. They were both deceased when we had validated them, but now we know of 2. And so that's 0 to 2. Now we're trying, Philippines, kind of a similar situation. So we really need to see some consistency and over time. And usually when somebody's 115, they'll start being in the news when they're 100 or 105. They'll make the local newspaper. There'll be some newsletter that congratulates them. So even in recent years, we look to see that consistency. And if anybody has it, there is a submission portal on our site. Just, hey, somebody who should be on the list? Just click right on it, submit it. We want to work with people. This is not an academic school where we're sitting here and marking your paper and sending it back with a D. I mean, if there's a gap in it, we're going to try to help you fill it. We want to know about all these people, and we want to know about these other areas that are just as worthy of living a long time as everybody else.
Fantastic. That's great. So, for me personally, I understand the philosophy behind what you are doing, which is amazing, really. But maybe some people ask that, okay, what is your maybe the vision that you have, and to have all these data and record, and how it can impact the whole field of longevity, or not just academic, but even people who are interested, how it can impact knowing all these data, what is the let's say the results that you get from the data, how it can help to improve this field.
So I'll focus specifically on data for this answer because, of course, we talked about life history, and I think there's a lot of information that people can learn. I know I've learned from the life histories of these people and the advice that they have to give. I would say with data, there is an interest, and we're aware of it and working with others on the interest in the genetic or epigenetic and biological. I'm not going to talk too much about that. We do have partners on that front, but in terms of the data that we're collecting, let's call it biographical, in terms of just looking at their lifestyle and how they grew up and how long their relatives lived, et cetera. We find some trends that are useful, not just for longevity, and not just for life extension, but also for elder care. And one thing we all have to realize about this, movement, obviously it would be ideal to just stop aging in place, and one day that'll be the case. But I think for a lot of us, what the natural result of a lot of these therapies will be is that we have, one way or another, not just because of demographic trends, there's going to be a much larger elderly population. And one thing that's notable, and we talked about, Senora Branios earlier, may she rest in peace. She lived in her residence for almost 30 years. And so think about that for a second, where you have somebody goes into a nursing home, so to say, an assisted living facility. In the United States, that can be perceived with, hey, that it's really kind of a last stop in some ways. And so there's something about that nursing home. There's something about the way that they treated her that led to that. And we noticed a lot that it's very rare for somebody, even if they had no kids, it's nieces, it's nephews, it's grandnieces, grandnephews, strong family connections. The hope is twofold: that one, we can figure out certain ways, and even if it comes down to products, we notice certain trends that folks are using where they're using certain products or types of products that are very helpful. Hearing is the biggest thing. When somebody can't be part of the conversation and they sit there and this is not the case with supercentenarians. There's always an effort made for them to be able to participate in the conversation. So we have a lot to learn, not just about extending life, but also the inevitable result of all of this, which is we're going to grow old to some extent. At least there's going to be a large chunk of us who aren't in time for that elixir, but we might live a long time elderly. There's fewer caregivers. How do we care for people the best? And then also on an individual basis, when we look at supercentenarians, whatever shape they may be in when they are a supercentenarian tends to vary. But what doesn't vary is the shape that they're in. Almost all of them can walk when they're 100 unassisted. That's one thing we look back at: when they were 100, could they walk unassisted? Almost all of them can. And you look at their quality of life when they're 100, 105, and oftentimes until they are a supercentenarian.
Yeah.
And we do hope that we can, by highlighting people who want to be highlighted, who are happy to, either them or their grandmother gets their time in the sun. We think they all deserve to be. But it shows a different side of aging, where one, the super centenarian is enjoying it, they're having a good time, but also there's their caregivers kind of set an example for everybody else. And some cultures have more to learn than others. In the U.S., I think aging is just a descent, just a decline, and in other places it's an ascent. And so hopefully with the data and then with presenting a different side of aging, we can learn how to age better. And I think we can get very granular with it. The more people that we know about, and we're knowing about more every day.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Actually, I really, really appreciate what you're doing. It's so interesting for me. I've seen almost all of the videos of Nir Barzilai, which also he is working on centenarian for many, many years. And I know that it's not easy. Okay, maybe let's say you enjoy it, but I know there are some challenges. So I want to hear from you. What are some challenges that you face in terms of collecting the data, the access that you have to people, because they're not normal people, right? And probably not all of them, I don't know, want to have this collaboration with you for monitoring or gathering data. So what are some challenges that you face in what you're doing?
Well, the biggest challenge, as you reference, is that we're dealing with people who can be quite vulnerable, who
Mm.
no matter what, even if somebody's 110, they might 12 years it'd be a little surprising. So we're dealing with people who are in a delicate situation. We always work with caregivers. One thing that we are very rigid about respecting anonymity. There has to be an affirmative. If somebody's reported in the media, we might know about them. But to go in to meet with them, of course, we're very delicate. One thing that's very helpful is having the guidance, either on staff or in collaboration with us, of former relatives of supercentenarians, people who are their granddaughter, great granddaughter, including in Japan, our president there, Yumi Yamamoto, who her great grandmother was second in Japan at 115, Shigeo Nakachi, only to Kane Tanaka, who was 119. So
Oh.
a very honorable second place, let's put it that way. But
Mhm.
when we have that experience, and plus all of us, I think in LongeviQuest have had a lot of experience personally with elderly people in our family or not. We approach it quite delicately, and we always let them dictate the conversation. Of course, there's with COVID, there's tests that we need to make. We need to be very careful when we're doing visits, but we have a very rigid protocol that we follow. And when we're actually doing the interview, I mentioned it a little bit earlier that it's very tough. We can't really sit there with a long survey and go line by line.
Right.
We always want to make sure they know why we're there and that they're
Mhm.
famous. I mean, they're famous at
Mhm.
this point. We're looking at people who, that's one thing that's unique about them. They never sought fame, or most of them did. There are some, former First Lady of Costa Rica. There are some who were famous before, but most are kind of almost famous by accident. Uh,
Mhm. Right.
but the ones we show up to have affirmed us showing up and are glad that we're doing so. And we just kind of take their lead. If they are keen to talk about the flowers that we brought them and that triggers certain memories, we let them do it. One thing we realize is that a small sentence can tell a whole lot. Oh, like these were the flowers for my 100th birthday that my grandson brought me. I mean, something like that tells a lot about the family, structure that the person
Yeah.
has. And so we don't prompt them. If they get tired, they're the boss. In most cases, what we find is the families tell us that they are really kind of triggered in a good way, kind of
Mhm.
stimulated by the attention. A lot of times local media comes, and of course local academics or researchers. So we take it very slowly. We make sure that they're there along. We never just see them by themselves, always caregivers, especially family members. And so far it's been great. We take it very seriously, and we treat each person as if they were our own grandmother, grandfather,
Yeah.
and we enjoy every single one.
Yeah, this is so interesting, actually. So, I would like to know more about the activities. For example, let's say, do you have a kind of recording like on the videos in your interviews? Are they available for people? I mean, maybe some people like to actually know more about them. What are the sources that probably you share with people? Or I don't know, do you have any something like gatherings, events, conferences, anything like that? What are the most of your activities that are public?
So we have on our website a lot of biographies. I would say for anybody who wants to see video, we have a good number of them on our YouTube channel. Just
Mhm.
LongeviQuest and at LongeviQuest.tv, I believe, links to it. So
Okay.
there are interviews with some around the world, super centenarians. And we're That's not always possible. Sometimes there's a camera shyness, so we might not do that. But if you look on LongeviQuest, and specifically for those who are looking for details about how they are today, about how the supercentenarians are enjoying their life today, we have a visit report section with the people that we go and we visit with, and we're routinely doing that. It's me a very small portion of the time. Usually, it's our folks who are more local to the supercentenarians. But on each of their pages, you can see a biography from what we know about them. You'll see some anonymous people on there because, look, if there might be an anonymous person who is still the 37th person of all time, just kind of pulling that number out. But we feel we need to include them on the list somehow. But you'll see some anonymous, but most aren't. And about most, there's a lot to learn. And about the visit reports or the YouTube channel would be the way I think to learn a lot about how they're living today. And most of them, I think you'll be very surprised at their ages. It's not usually, I say this to a few of them, it's not usually a compliment to say somebody seems like they're 85 or 90, but they do. And they seem about 30 years younger than they are. So I recommend people take a look at that. And I think it'll be, it's kind of hopeful for what it could look like. It's not what people think sometimes when they think about 115-year-olds.
Yeah, exactly. That is exactly the thing. Because, when we talk about 100, 110, for example, the first thing that comes to my mind is the wisdom that these people have or how they have spent their life. But after that, I think, okay, what is their hope? I mean, what is their motivation to get up again in the morning? Because they are not as, let's say, they used to be like 20 years ago. So probably they face with, let's say, some physical limitations, some diseases, because I've seen a lot of videos. There are people like 80, 90 that they have passed like 2 or 3 cancers, and they're very hopeful. And this is so interesting because in HealthGevity Nation, now we are taking the science of longevity to schools. Actually, we are teaching children about it. We want to raise the awareness about the lifestyle, about how lifestyle choices can help them to prevent a lot of aging-related diseases. And this word of longevity and the whole, let's say, field is not very well known for many people, even academics, but we want to simplify it as much as possible, and starting from students and young people so that they have an idea about the next 50 years, 100, how they are going to. But what I want to say is, when you talk to, let's say, a person like 30 or 40, when you ask them, do you want to live 100? They say no, most of them, because I think they see that, okay, 100 means not being independent financially, physically, emotionally, all of the things. And beside that, you got a lot of diseases, and this is not good. So they don't have a good idea about it. So first of all, I want to ask that, based on your experience, data, or maybe face-to-face interview with some of them, what is the most important, let's say, motivation that they have, the hope that they have to live another day, another year, or I don't know, some years? And what have you learned from that? Because this is interesting for myself.
The most important thing would be daily rituals. They don't look very far ahead. And if you ask most centenarians, and I'm talking here about super centenarians, 110 up, very few aspired to reach that age or ever consciously were trying to do it. It was, hey, either tomorrow this is going to happen. Tomorrow is my favorite show is on, or my granddaughter's coming to visit, and in a couple of days it's Sunday. Looking ahead to small pleasures, whatever they may be. If I had to narrow it down, there would be between family, faith. I have to stress that a huge portion of supercentenarians are people of faith, and with faith comes community. And then the third would be daily rituals that maybe aren't always the best, and maybe this is useful for school children, because I think that there's a perception now that longevity requires kind of a renouncing of all pleasures, and being asleep firmly and being awake. These are not people who followed a rigid bedtime. They were comfortable, they were stress free. And so I would say that looking ahead to things in the immediate future rather than the delayed gratification, for them, it's amazing because not many of them were wealthy. And especially looking at the standards back then, they grew up with a lot of hardship.
Absolutely.
Some were, but not many, but a lot of hardship. But there's just a great ability to find pleasure in simple things. And so I would say that being an aspiration to reach that age, even today, I don't think there are many of them who are actively looking, oh, I want to be the oldest person in the world. It's not really a competition. It's, wow, I got to spend these extra years getting to see my granddaughter grow up and become a granddaughter, which happens with a lot of them. Their grandchildren become grandchildren. And as a
Yes.
consequence of living those extra years, they happen to be the oldest person in Spain, whatever that may be. And they just kind of accept it as it is. So I think that the one fallacy we do see is that there's an effort to do this on the part of the supercentenarians. They really have lived this long accidentally. And a lot of the theories and that people might have, oh, well, she never drank. If somebody says something like that, that's retrospective. That's looking at it afterwards. So I think that people can have a fun life and an enjoyable life doing things in moderation, and still live a very long time. And hopefully that can motivate people a little more, because I agree with you. The longevity field has a demand problem. I heard it put very well in Dublin. I think it was Martin O'Day who said it. Something along the lines of, well, we don't want it enough. I think that's very true.
Exactly.
And making it clear that longevity, those years can be good years also, will hopefully make more people want to live to 100. Because I'm amazed when I see the numbers that you referenced, that, when I see those polls about how long people want to live, that's very sad. And that's a perception that we're hoping to change, because it's not just about the supercentenarians, it's about how they were at younger years, and about the quality of life for a very long time. It's a health span story, not just lifespan.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so true. And in the event seminars, when I ask people, I say, okay, do you want to live to 100 and over 100? Well, probably 2 or 3 people say yes. And then I change the question and see how the people answer actually. I say, all right, imagine you are 100 now with the same health that you have today. Do you want to die tomorrow? No one. All right. No one wants to die tomorrow.
Right. Or think about, well, do you want your grandmother to live to 100? Don't think about you. Think about your grandma.
Absolutely.
You want your mom, your parent. And think about that as well. I think about this in terms of Africa and how critical it is with research, because you're about to have if we don't already, the world's largest population of grandchildren. Africa is the youngest continent demographically. There are a lot of children, and people in general haven't lived as long. So you're going to have a very bottom-heavy society in terms of a lot of grandchildren who it's tough, I think, sometimes for children, as you're probably noticing, sometimes to grasp longevity concepts. But I think in view of their grandma, everyone wants their grandma to live to 110. And so when people look at it not as themselves, they get a little bit less concerned about things like needing a walker or having a disease. They just want them to be around. And that's a very nice concept. And hopefully people can realize that these tips are not just for us or for you, it's for your loved ones as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And some of them bring some excuses like this. Okay, I don't want to live to that age because probably I lose my friends and families, and I don't want to live alone. But when you say, okay, you're not going to live alone, they are going to live with you the same if we all try, So as you said, really there is not enough and serious demand for that, as much as people have for death. So talking about death of death, okay, Jose Luis Cordero's one of the best book I've ever, and you can't believe, when I started reading it about 2 or 3 years ago, almost 3, I thought that, this is the book that for many years, most of the ideas was within me. And for me, myself, it started when I was 17. I read the book of Alan Harrington, The Immortalist, which starts with this sentence and says that death is an imposition on human being and is no longer acceptable. And from that time, for me, it was very interesting to see that how, let's say, that the life is going to change. How are we going to live in the next 20, 30, 50 years? So let me ask you this question. Since you're talking to a lot of people, centenarians over 100, tell me how many years do you want to live?
Many. If I had to pick, I mean, give me 200. Now, what I think is realistic, I mean, who knows? Because I think it's odd that somebody would not want to, because I think there's a perception right now that the world is getting worse, and there's always people at any point in history, somebody could pick certain metrics and say, oh, the world's getting worse. But by most of them, the world is getting better. And there's a huge, social media points out every negative. I think there's something with the being in the phone society that is causing an issue. Whatever it is, I think that I don't know why somebody would not have optimism that the world is getting better. And I think that there probably are reasons in somebody's own life that there could be problems, but looking at
paying attention to the news, a lot of news means the negative things that are happening around us. So the data is it's all about the bad things.
but in a macro sense, the world is getting a lot better, and that's one thing that I don't get, and so I hope that people start to have that mentality. I would want to live as long as it's possible. Obviously, health and quality of life have a lifestyle, but even if somebody's unhealthy, the cure is a discovery away. And I do believe that there is momentum that gradually gets built, and as you find a cure for one thing, it might be easier to find a cure for another. Personally, I don't know why. I saw how quickly they got the COVID vaccine. Whatever somebody's opinion on it, the entire industry was just taken. And I had always thought, well, wouldn't it be a nice idea if you take that and you just take all that effort and all that government directive, all that commerce, and just put it towards cancer, or maybe you start with lung cancer or heart cancer or whatever it may be,
Or
and
aging
go from there.
itself as the
Right.
root of most of the diseases, right?
Aging's the root of it all, and whether I wonder what the best approach to it would be, what to start with, but I feel like that taking that gigantic kind of power that everybody put together, that private-public partnership, there's really no reason. One thing is supercentenarians very rarely get cancer, almost never, and when they do, it's things like relatively, I'll say relatively innocuous in terms of breast cancer, colon cancer, and skin cancer. Relatively, there could be horror stories, but even still, it's less than 10% of supercentenarians. So there is stuff that we can learn there. But I definitely think that there is a perception that things are a lot worse than they actually are, and there are solutions around the corner. And I don't know why society demobilized after COVID, when there's a lot of things that people die from on a yearly basis that we just tolerate with the blink of an eye. It doesn't make sense to me.
Absolutely. And I mean, every single day in the morning when we get up, almost 100,000 people have died because of the aging-related diseases, right?
Yes, 100%.
So
It doesn't make
we
any sense.
totally take it for granted and we don't see it.
Mhm.
Okay, this is the most serious thing that we have to pay attention to it. Even the COVID with the worst, it was 1/10 of this. And every single day we are losing so many amazing people. So I actually asked Alex Javaronkov, him, about the same thing, that what if all the governments, all people, all organizations together put such an effort, and I'm sure that probably in a decade or less than a decade, we can do something great about it. So this is something that hopefully some countries like Saudi Arabia, that they have started. I mean, they have now invested like $20 billion on just longevity for the next 20 years. And this is amazing. Actually, just about a few, I think weeks ago, I had another podcast with Sergey Young, which he said the same thing. He said that, okay, I want to live 200. And I said, okay, what about 201 day? Okay,
Right,
you never say
always
no.
beyond. Never say no. But I think what Saudi Arabia is doing is that I can't believe that we're not doing that here in the United States, and other countries aren't doing it too. It's very forward thinking. And in the process of addressing aging, as you mentioned, it all comes down to aging. It all comes down to cells getting older and cells getting weaker. And so looking at that's gonna, with the lifespan, sometimes people think it's just about making people get older, but aging cures stop somebody from dying at 40 as well. And they stop people on the low end from bringing down the life expectancy. So hopefully more countries adopt what they're doing. I'm all in favor of it. And I think everybody could benefit from it, not just people who are very elderly.
Exactly. And then let me tell you something that probably even you can help us with that. And I have written my second book, which the name is HealthGevity Journey. You see on my t-shirt, actually.
Yeah.
So for many years, I've read a lot of books about longevity, but there was not like a blueprint for, people without the academic background, how to do the whole thing for longevity. So I created 12 pillars, so step by step people can learn. So now I'm writing my third book, which I've called it "Why Aging is a Disease and Why and How We Should Stop It." So my question is this: actually, a few days ago, I asked Aubrey. Technically, he doesn't believe that. Or he doesn't consider aging as a disease, even though David Sinclair or many other longevity scientists, they consider aging as a disease, both technically and both from the societal, economical point of view, that how much it is important to consider it as a disease, because when you do that, the whole, let's say, it will be a paradigm shift in this field. So I want to ask you this question, probably not to explain it, let's say, from the scientific background, but tell me your idea. What do you think? Do you think that we should somehow consider aging as a disease, and what will be the positive or maybe negative consequences of doing that?
Yes, and I think maybe when people hear aging, I think I've heard the term cellular senescence, and maybe I'm even not using it correctly, but we're talking about the degradation of cells, and there are people say, well, it's a natural process. Well, in a sense, I mean, so are most diseases. They don't
Yes,
they don't need
absolutely.
to have the intervention of anything else. But maybe this is a flawed judgment, but when I see what happened when obesity, there's an epidemic, and I'm generally, maybe this is controversial. I'm of the opinion that's something that, for the most part, with some exceptions, people do to themselves. I know I in my life have gained weight, have lost weight, and that to me seems a little crazy. But when we look at the resources, I'm not saying that Ozempic, this revolution, is a direct consequence of that. But when society started viewing obesity as something that happens to somebody instead of something they do to themselves, and I know that might rub people the wrong way, but
Right.
when society viewed things that way, the solutions came. And so
Yeah.
when I look at aging and cellular senescence, whatever it may be, to have it declared that, one, it's also it leads to new drugs being covered for people. There's a lot of benefits practically. Unfortunately, in the U.S., fortunately or unfortunately, what happens in terms of the government classifications mean a great deal for the entire industry. And so I think it would be
Right.
very helpful from a practical perspective as far as drug development, as far as drug coverage for insurance reasons. In the U.S., I hope it happens, and I hope it happens worldwide.
Yeah, actually, there's a very interesting example of this, that osteoporosis was not considered as a disease before 1979, and it was considered as a result of aging. They said, okay, aging is something normal, natural, it happens for everyone, so as the osteoporosis and all of the problems after that. But after that, they found out, okay, no, this is something that we can intervene, we can do something about it. So I think the reason of most people who still they say, okay,
Great
no,
example.
aging is not a disease or something like this, is because they think that we cannot do something about it. That's why they say, okay, so when we cannot do something about it, let's just accept it. And this is the thing that I think we need to change it. That's why we are going to schools to start this from the beginning and tell children that aging, at least it is a problem that can be solved. Actually, this is something that exactly Aubrey said, that yes, it is a problem, that we have solution for it, even though maybe the solution now is not great or we cannot have that much impact on that, but at least we can do something about it. Even with changing in the lifestyle, you know that, for example, the first four pillars of HealthGevity that I'm talking about, the first one is sleep, then is exercise, then diet, and then mindset. If we only have these four right, okay, just this four can easily extend 10 healthy years to our life. And as Brian Johnson says, don't die, right? The don't die means that don't kill yourself. If you just only do not do something that harms you, easily you get 10 more years, let alone if you are strict about it. What do you think?
The osteoporosis example in arthritis, I think I haven't heard that before, and that's a perfect example because when you look at, well, I think the common theory with aging and well, it's not a disease, it just happens. Well, so do your bones get weak, and you get hunched over time, and you lose your appetite. There's all the symptoms of aging that I guess at one time I didn't know that it wasn't considered a disease, but
Yeah.
that's the direction, and I think that with I think the biggest benefit, what you're saying is the absolute baseline, and that's something that everybody should be doing. Watching diet, not being perfect, but being good about
Of
it.
course.
Sleep
Yeah.
good, with everything within reason, everything in moderation, including dieting,
Yes.
I'm sure. But beyond that, I think the therapies and the drugs that will get discovered by considering it a disease are the key factors. And I think that's the perfect example because it's something that was once considered unavoidable. We're all going to go through it. It just happens. And that has since been addressed. And even looking at that, it's not that necessarily extends lifespan directly, but the biggest change in condition for a centenarian or super centenarian is a fall, and that's the case for
Yes,
slightly
absolutely.
younger
Loss
people
of
as well.
muscle, actually. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
That's
That too,
true.
and if their bones are weaker, whatever that, however that may be a second or third order effect, addressing osteoporosis extends lifespan one way or another for a lot of people. And so
Mhm.
I really am in favor of it being declared a disease, and I think that a lot of good could come from it, and we've seen recent examples of it.
That's great. Let me give you another example, and maybe this is the final one. Progeria is a genetic disease, which means progeria, means the early aging. So it happens in some children with a genetic, let's say, problem and mutation that in the age of 5, already their body is, let's say, like 40 or 50 years, and they do not age or live more than 15 years, and they die. And in the age of 15, their whole body is just like a person of, let's say, 90 or 100. So it means that, okay, why an aging, if happens in 15 years, this is a disease, but if it happens in 100 is not. And another thing is that they say, okay, it is because it is not natural. Okay, of course it's natural, but it is not normal or it's not public and not everyone get it. Okay, that doesn't make it, let's say, I mean, you cannot justify because malaria, for example, is natural, but malaria vaccine is not natural. Which one is good? So natural does not mean it is something good. That's why I think we need to really change this mindset among people, especially young people. So
I totally agree.
yeah, for the last maybe, I don't know, actually, I have still a lot of questions. I would like to continue, but I know your time and our time is limited. So for the last thing, maybe something new, your events, activities, or whatever you are interested, you can just let us know, please.
So most of our events are with super centenarians, and I would just encourage you to keep looking at on our website because what we don't typically announce them beforehand because they do there might be if they're not feeling well that morning, it's off. We'll come back the next day. So we usually don't have a calendar of them, but I would say over the next few weeks there's going to be some very interesting ones, and just learn about these people, whether they're living or deceased, to learn about what persevered and just even for some historical tips. I would say keep following our site and our YouTube channel, and you'll see what we're up to. We look forward to really visiting more and more of these people. And as we do more visits and meet more of them and meet their families, we'll have some more takeaways on a more general population basis that we look forward to sharing as well.
Fantastic. And we'll put your links in the description. And also, the last request that I have is, as I told you, the third book I'm writing, I'm not writing alone. Actually, it's like another 100 longevity experts, scientists, influencers, and each of them from their perspective and, let's say, background. So I would like to invite you, maybe because I know that this is your point of view is very different. So probably you are the best to see it from this perspective. So I'll invite you to write a very short chapter about it. So it will be a book that a lot of people start thinking that how to see it at least as a disease and start taking action to slow it down, stop, and even reverse it. So this is something that I would be happy actually to have you there.
I'd be honored. I really appreciate that. And I think what you're doing is absolutely phenomenal to change. I think what you're doing is a demand driver for solutions for longevity and just, something that people could really use in a lot of places. So I'm very honored that you've asked me and I'm happy to join the crusade here.
Thank you. That's great. And the last thing again, let's say the latest project that we have, we call it HealthGevity Nation Passport. We are working on that yet, but we are granting it to people like you and that have, let's say, significant activities and impact on the longevity field. So with this passport, there will come some features, and soon we will work on that to upgrade it. But anyway, we'll send you more information and invite you to join the HealthGevity Nation. Together, we can do a lot. The problem that we have is we are not united, right? That much that we could. So thank you so much for your time. It was great talking to you, and hope we can do a lot together.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.